The theme of the frontier underwent a transition in the last half of the 20th century. Many photographers wanted to distinguish their style from the powerful visions of Weston and Adams.
And the one thing that neither Ansel, nor Edward, nor Bret Weston would ever do is spoil pristine nature by footsteps in it, which is more meaningful to me. I like also the signs of man being there and his habitation and what he does or doesn't do to the environment.
Others began to see the frontier as a vehicle to convey their own social philosophies.
And so if the landscape moves out of this heroic mode, we find a kind of diminution in the heroic world and an intensification in the landscape as an indicator of man's relationship to the world and man's relationship to man, and the growing concerns with population, with ecology, environmental decay and pollution. All these begin to be thematic elements in the new American landscape.
I was traveling in New Mexico, and I was driving up to Los Alamos, and I looked up in the sky and there was this gigantic mushroom cloud in the sky. And I pulled over, stopped my car, and took this photograph, and I started thinking about how we are making an impression on our environment. And I decided to become much more of an activist through my work.
Photographers also began to use the camera not just to represent reality, but to create reality. And with the influence of pop culture, some started to incorporate everyday objects into their pictures. Items that had never been regarded as proper subjects for a photograph suddenly became relevant.
The stylistic approach of photographers, for the most part, really took their cue from minimalism and from pop art. They gained a sense that an aesthetic object could in fact be formed from an uninflected, understated description of a world, that you didn't need all these pyrotechnics of fluffy cumulus clouds and dark background, that you could use the photographs as a way to talk about ordinary, everyday objects. And so that tract houses and trailers and grain elevators became objects of inquiry and scrutiny.
But it was upheaval surrounding the Vietnam War that forced the greatest change in America's conception of the frontier. The war called into question the traditional values symbolized by the frontier: heroism, optimism, the can-do American attitude. The conflict caused photographers to reassess their motives and their goals.
These concerns, both aesthetic and political, certainly influenced photographers as they began to look at the landscape. That it was hard to kind of duplicate and reinvent the grand heroic treatment that Adams had given the landscape. It made much more sense to do something that was closer to the realities of the world.
All of these changes caused a shift in the perception of the frontier by American photographers.
landscape photography of the mid-70s, I think, challenged all the basic notions of the frontier mythology. It began to talk about reality instead of mythology. It brought to bear the issues of ecology, of politics. It showed that the land and the use of the land was not a separate enclave that had nothing to do with everyday life, but in fact was pivotal to America's sense of itself.
No one could predict how this new sense of the frontier would find its way into the work of landscape photographers.